Okay, can you see the PowerPoint presentation? So, it's strange, maybe. Okay. So I want to today discuss about the Gorbachev's policy in COMECON, especially in from the 1989 to 1991. That means after the collapse of a socialist system in Eastern Europe. And this project is part of part of our project with Alexei in Chelyabinsk, and I have just begun my project from the last year, so it may be a bit in the beginning still. And there are several questions regarding the COMECON in 1980s. For example, how did the CMEA or COMECON function in the 1980s? In the 1970s, I mean, or in the 1960s, the Soviet supply of oil and gas and other natural resources, so to say, enlarged the cooperation within the bloc. But already in the end of 1970s, such a Soviet export of natural resources could not be maintained. And then came the famous path of export to the Eastern European countries of oil by 10%, which caused tremendous economic difficulties, especially in the GDR, but not only there. And thereafter, somehow, the Soviet Union needed to find other ways, other mechanisms to develop the cooperation further. And during the new Cold War, they thought that the scientific technological cooperation could or should play an important role in enhancing the cooperation within the sphere. So in 1984, the COMECON countries convened a summit meeting of the member states, and there they decided to draw up a comprehensive program for scientific and technological progress. But it was already in 1984, and then Chernenko died quite soon, and then came Gorbachev as a next leader of the Soviet Union. And under, Gorbachev first tried to somehow develop this scientific technological cooperation. But already in 1986, he came to realize that such a cooperation alone cannot somehow enhance the cooperation. So then is the question. So what was the Gorbachev's idea of enhancing the cooperation, and how the other member states reacted to it? And what kind of role did the CMEA play in Gorbachev's idea of common European home? I mean, he pushed this idea several times, and especially in the late period. But if the scholars usually talk about this idea, like Mary Sarati, it's about German unification or Warsaw Pact stories, and the CMEA is seldom mentioned in the historiography. So that is the point, and especially the last 2 points will be the theme of this presentation. First of all, usually the story of the CMEA ends in 1989, and thereafter there are scarcely any mention about the CMEA in the historiography, and it seems as if the CMEA almost automatically disintegrated. But was it so simple? That is my first question. And then how the discussion within the COMECON continued during 1990 and 1991. And the second question is, if we talk about the common European home idea of Gorbachev, then it is important to note that CMEA COMECON had non-European member states, 3 non-European member states, namely Mongolia, Cuba, and Vietnam, and how to somehow um, reorient the intra-bloc economic organization if that will become a pure European sort of organization. That is my second point. And in fact, these non-European member states played a certain role in the course of CMEA's dissolution, so to say. So let's begin to the story, and it's about, first of all, in the early period of Gorbachev's perestroika. So, and as I have mentioned, in 1985 and in 1986, Gorbachev first tried to continue the goal which was presented during Andropov and Chernenko's period. That means scientific technological cooperation. But by the end of 1986, he realized that this alone cannot make sense, and he tried to introduce some market-oriented reforms of intra-bloc economic cooperation. Concretely, he proposed to introduce mutual convertibility of currencies and further direct contacts between firms of member states. I mean, at that time, still foreign trade was mostly dominated by foreign trade companies, but he wanted to um, get away with this trade barrier, and direct contacts between the firms should be sort of encouraged. And what was the reaction of Eastern European countries to the initial Gorbachev's idea? Support from Poland and Hungary. Well, I mean, at that time, they had similar ideas or more advanced ideas as to this intra-bloc economic reforms. And at the same time, silence from other countries. I mean, the GDR, Romania, Bulgaria, they are against such radical reforms, which actually were already, I mean, in discussion in the second half of 1960s, but still they were against such a proposal, and thereafter the discussion came to almost nothing. I mean, because of this and opposition, especially from Romania and the GDR, they could not reach agreement until 1989. And in that period, Gorbachev's idea further developed, and I mean, the Soviets began to use a phrase like unified socialist market and so on through some sort of tariff union, but not such a in rapid pace, but slowly. And then came this Eastern European Revolution of 1989. Shortly after the collapse of Ceausescu's regime, the CMEA convened a plenum in January 1990. At first, the member states wanted to discuss precisely this scientific technological progress and so on, but they changed the focus of the plenum and wanted to discuss more about this need of fundamental reform of the organization, as well as mechanism of economic relations between the member states. So, and here, Central European three countries, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Poland, began to demand that the CMEA should become a mere consultative forum, mere consultative organ without any further economic cooperation in real sense. But at the same time, they were not against the existence of the organization itself, because they also apparently knew that the transition period will be tough, and during this period, some sort of consultation and exchange of information, and maybe a sort of very limited coordination could play a certain role, or somehow lessen the burden of transformation. And the other countries, other non-European countries, were more nuanced. I mean, they also realized that the market-oriented reform should be necessary, but they wanted at the same time maintain some sort of plan coordination as planned And here, apparently, the Central European three became more closer between themselves, whereas the Soviet Union somehow wanted to maintain a sort of economic cooperation between the member states. And that was not the whole story. Here, especially in 1990, the Soviets demanded hard currency trade, introduction of hard currency trade with current world price from the next year. Here, apparently, economic interest of the Soviet Union played a certain role because the Soviet Union calculated, estimated that if they introduce the hard currency trade with current world price, the trade surplus would be huge. But if they continue to maintain the old price system, there will be a huge trade deficit against the Eastern European countries. So that kind of economic interest, according to East German sources, and I'm here, I do not have the Soviet sources, but according to the East German sources, such a consideration was important in the Soviet decision to push such a hard currency trade. Besides this purely economic interest, there are also general idea as to the pan-European integration, which was put forward by Gorbachev himself. Here, the Soviets apparently wanted to integrate somehow CMEA and EC into a pan-European framework, like the Warsaw Pact and NATO into a common security framework. And therefore, as a first step to prepare for such an integration, they wished to realize a single CMEA market through free trade zone, tariff union, and monetary union. At the same time, they still wanted to maintain a sort of existing framework of cooperation or coordination of economic policies, large-scale joint projects, and so on. And as the Central European countries opposed to such ideas, they proposed to create a special commission within the COMECON to prepare the draft proposal for new economic relations, as well as new statute and principles of the CMEA. And discussions within the special commission continued for a long time, and all European members in principle accepted the need of creating a pan-European economic space. I mean, they also used the words, but the meaning was totally different from the Soviet Union, especially for the Central European three countries. Especially Poland insisted that because domestic situation of member states differed from country to country, achieving a united Europe in coordination with all the member states of the CMEA would be difficult, and it will also take time. So basically, the CMEA could exist, but at the same time, they should somehow speed up the coordination between those countries that were ready to radical marketization, market-oriented reforms. And Poland pushed the idea of ending the CMEA as such, but still maintaining a successor organization as a consultative organ. So there were, and Bulgaria and Hungary were in between, I mean, between the Soviet Union and these Central European countries. Then came the withdrawal of the GDR from the CMEA. After the March election, the GDR was defeated. I mean, Hans Motro was defeated by de Maizière, and de Maizière is a politician of CDU, so he was supported by Helmut Kohl, and the victory of de Maizière meant that German unification would take place according to the idea of Helmut Kohl. So that meant, in other words, GDR's withdrawal from the CMEA. And apparently, this election changed the mood within the Special Commission and other organs for further discussion. And the Soviet Union gradually accepted almost all the demands of Central European three countries. And namely, it dropped the demand that member states should not sign treaties that would contradict with the CMEA obligation. That means the Central European three countries wanted or demanded that they should have the right to sign a treaty that would establish economic communities with countries or groups outside or inside the CMEA cooperation. That means the CMEA would virtually mean only a sort of safety net, and which could be somehow abandoned if there would appear a more relevant organization or cooperation or framework and so on. But still, by accepting these almost every demand from the Central Europe, the Soviet Union attempted to maintain at least a sort of framework for the future pan-European integration. And as a result, by the end of 1990, actually, on almost all the points, both the Soviet Union and Central European countries had the same or reached agreement sort of concerning European dimensions. But here, the non-European member states who had caused a sort of problems and delayed the agreement. So I think I don't have that much time left. So I will speed up my presentation. And if the Soviet Union want to make the CMEA into a European organization, the place of non-European member states became very unstable. But still, they demanded during 1990 that they continue to be present at the new organization, and at the same time demanded a preferential price according to the principle of the CMEA. Especially Cuba was most insistent on this point, whereas Vietnam, which was already on the path of economic reform, was rather calm on this point. Mongolia was somewhere in between Cuba and Vietnam. The Soviet Union at first was sympathetic to their demand, but Eastern Europeans were fiercely against such a continuation of preferential treatment of the non-European member states. And Cuba especially continued to demand this point even after the controversies between the Soviet Union and Eastern European countries almost had ended. So this delayed further agreement, but in the end, by early February, all member states agreed to the statute of the OMES, or Organization of International Economic Relations, the new successor organization of the CMEA. But then suddenly, 5 days before the 46th plenum meeting in the end of February, Central European three countries decided to retract the agreement. The Hungarians put forward their doubts about the range of member states, agendas of organization, and so on. And apparently, I assume I do not have any documents as to the Central European countries, so I may be wrong. But here, apparently, Visegrad Summit on 15th February played a certain role. After that, they changed, presumably, their mind. And as the pretext, they used this problem of non-European member states, but not about the special treatment, which was dropped almost entirely, but the membership itself, which was not discussed during the discussion of 1990. And the Soviet Union had to postpone the final CMEA plenum, and during further negotiations, they insisted that OMES is a mere consultative organ, so the regionality of membership does not mean anything. We do not have such a regional cooperation and so on. So they somehow wanted to still maintain the membership of non-European states, but here they could not agree with the Central Europeans, and Bulgaria and also Romania were against that. And finally, the decision to disband the CMEA first and continue negotiations of the statute of OMES were decided, but without any further negotiations. That means the end of the SME without any successor organizations. So if we see the final phase of SME after 1989, there are some interesting points, especially as to the role of non-European member states. I mean, to realize or somehow maintain at least a potential possibility for further cooperation, the Soviet Union took compromise and agreed to almost all the points of the Central European countries, but still this non-European membership or special treatment for them delayed the discussion, and during that period, the fundamental change occurred in Central Europe, and that put or made it impossible to establish the new organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.